Welcome back, deep divers. Today, well, we're going deep, like way back in time.
Oh, sounds exciting. How far back are we talking?
I think July 1987.
Wow, that's specific. Okay, I'm intrigued. What's so special about July 87?
We've got excerpts from the Third Decade Journal, that's JFK Assassination research, and some dead suspects investigations, all pointing towards some pretty shadowy connections, maybe even conspiracies.
Conspiracies. Always a good way to kick off a deep dive. Tell me more.
Buckle up, because we're talking secret societies, we're talking a powerful dynasty, and, oh, did I mention whispers of Cold War espionage?
Okay, you've definitely got my attention now. Where do we even begin with all that?
Let's start with the Knights of Malta.
The Knights of Malta, huh? Not just your average social club, right?
Definitely not. They've got a history, like way back before 1099. They started as a Catholic order, but then, well, they became pretty powerful, even ruling Rhodes for a while.
Yeah, their influence is incredible. They had a hand in the Inquisition, they went up against King Henry VIII, and they were a major naval force. They really made their mark on history.
But here's where it gets crazy. They actually had an American chapter by 1927. And, get this, some members were linked to plots to overthrow FDR. There were even whispers of ties to neo-Nazi groups.
Wow, that's pretty wild. Makes you wonder, what kind of influence did they have in the U.S., especially during the JFK era?
Especially because, remember, some big names were Knights of Malta. Allen Dulles, the first CIA director who was on the Warren Commission, Gerald Ford, James Jesus Angleton, George Raymond Rocca. The list goes on.
If we're talking JFK's assassination, that's a lot of potential influence, right? Maybe even some hidden agendas at play.
Exactly. Now, let's switch gears for a second. Think Nicaragua. Think the Somoza family.
The Somozas. Ah, yes. Ruling a country for over 40 years, that's a dynasty if I've ever seen one.
A dynasty built on, well, let's just say military might, some clever political moves, and a whole lot of ruthlessness.
To really understand the Somozas, we need to go back to Anastasio Somoza Garcia, a.k.a. Tacho. He rose through the ranks of the National Guard back in the 1920s and 30s, a time of major conflict in Nicaragua. Remember Augusto Cesar Sandino and his guerrilla insurgency?
Yeah, that was a turbulent period. So how did Tacho rise to power amidst all that chaos?
Well, in 1934, while Sandino and the government were actually trying to make peace, Tacho saw an opportunity. His National Guardsmen ambushed and killed Sandino. It was a brutal move, but it cleared the path for Tacho's rise.
So a bit of treachery paved the way for him.
It did. With Sandino gone, Tacho leveraged his military power to secure the presidency by the end of 1936. And once he was in office, he tightened his grip on power, even testing the waters by installing puppet leaders.
But his ambition didn't stop at Nicaragua's borders, right?
Yeah.
He had his fingers in a lot of pies across Central America.
Oh, absolutely. He was a master of intrigue. In 1948, he gave Costa Rican exiles safe haven in Nicaragua to launch an attack on their own country. He even teamed up with Rafael Trujillo, the dictator of the Dominican Republic, to plot the assassination of Jose Figueres, a prominent Costa Rican politician. Talk about ruthless.
And let's not forget his role in the CIA-backed overthrow of the Guatemalan government in 1954. That led to decades of brutal dictatorship.
Right, and there's even evidence linking him to Guy Bannister, that former FBI agent and right-wing extremist, in an organization called the Anti-Communist League of the Caribbean.
It's amazing how connected he was, and not always in the best ways.
Yeah.
But as we all know, what goes around comes around, and Tacho's luck eventually ran out.
It did. In a dramatic turn of events, he was assassinated in September 1956. Picture this: a dinner in the city of Leon. A poet named Rigoberto Lopez Perez walks up and shoots Tacho.
A poet assassinating a dictator. That's a story in itself.
It is. Perez was killed right there by security, but Tacho's wounds were fatal. The U.S. government even flew him to a hospital in Panama, but he died a few days later.
A dramatic end to a controversial figure. So what happened next? Enter Luis Somoza Debayle, Tacho's eldest son. Did he bring change to Nicaragua, or was it business as usual?
Luis, now that's an interesting character. He was educated in the U.S., even spending time in Louisiana, where, coincidentally, Guy Bannister was operating. He attended a military academy on Long Island, got a degree from UC Davis, and even studied agriculture.
It sounds like he was being groomed for leadership.
Oh, definitely. His father made him a captain in the National Guard when he was just 18. While he was in the States, he even served as Nicaragua's military attaché. Then, back in Nicaragua, he managed the family's farms, led the national airline, and was the president of the Chamber of Deputies.
A busy guy.
Yeah.
But I read that unlike his father and brother, Luis wasn't really interested in the military.
That's true. He actually left the National Guard in 1950 as a colonel, But when his father died, he stepped right into the presidency. The Nicaraguan Congress quickly named him the new leader, and an election in 1957 confirmed it. A lot of people say Luis loosened his father's grip, allowed more political debate, tried to boost the economy, even talked about democracy.
Sounds promising. Was it all just for show, though?
Sadly, yes. Behind Luis's more moderate image, the Somoza family's power remained. He might have eased up on some things, but they still controlled the National Guard and the ruling party completely. And let's not forget his younger brother, Anastasio, or Tachito, the head of the National Guard. He was much more ruthless.
So the family business continued as usual.
Exactly. Luis might have seemed more moderate, but the Somozas were still calling the shots in Nicaragua. And let's not forget, they were amassing a fortune while doing it. Estimates range from hundreds of millions to almost $1 billion.
But the world was changing around them, right? With Fidel Castro's rise to power in Cuba in 1959, things got a lot more complicated.
Oh, absolutely. The Somozas saw Castro as a direct threat. And that context is crucial to understanding everything that happened next.
The Cold War was in full swing, and the Somozas were firmly in the U.S. camp, vehemently anti-communist. It seems like the stage was set for some high-stakes maneuvering.
You got it. And in the years leading up to JFK's assassination, things got even more intriguing.
That's what we'll be diving into next time. Okay, so we've got these two threads. The Knights of Malta, potentially pulling strings in the U.S., and the Somozas, clinging to power in Nicaragua, staunchly anti-Castro. How do they connect in those years leading up to JFK's assassination?
It's the question at the heart of it all, isn't it? And to try and find an answer, we need to look closely at Luis Somoza in '63, the year Kennedy was killed.
What was he doing that raises those red flags?
Well, there are these meetings and activities, and when you put them all together, well, they paint a very interesting picture. It looks like Luis was operating pretty independently, maybe even had his own agenda going on.
Okay, you've piqued my curiosity. Give me the highlights. What were the key moments?
Summer of '63, Luis gets a visit from Manuel Artime. CIA favorite, led the Brigade 2506 at the Bay of Pigs.
Ah, the Bay of Pigs. A not-so-successful attempt to oust Castro.
Exactly. Well, Artime, he's got backing from the CIA and the White House for a new plan. A second Havana for anti-Castro operations right here in Central America. Train soldiers, launch attacks on Cuba, the whole 9 yards. Luis is on board, provides some sites for a base in Nicaragua, even connects Artime with the Ecuadorian president to secure even more locations.
So even after the Bay of Pigs fiasco, Luis is still gung-ho about getting rid of Castro.
Oh, yeah. And remember, all this is happening while René Schick Gutierrez is officially president of Nicaragua, a puppet leader handpicked by Luis in the February '63 election. But behind the scenes, Luis is still very much the one calling the shots.
Sounds like his focus was more on Cuba than running Nicaragua.
Sharp observation. And it doesn't stop there. August of that year, a State Department official, J.H. Crimmins, meets with the head of a Cuban exile group in Chicago. And Crimmins finds out that Luis is making some pretty bold claims.
What kind of claims are we talking about?
Luis is telling everyone he has U.S. backing for a whole Central American movement to overthrow Castro.
That's a big statement, especially if it's not true. How did the U.S. government react to that?
Crimmins denied any such backing existed, even urged the Cuban exile group to stay away from Nicaragua. It seems like Luis might have been getting a bit out of control, maybe even working against what the U.S. wanted.
Didn't Luis also have some shady meetings with a few other people that year? I feel like I read something about that.
You're right. There are 3 names that really stand out. Miguel de Leon, Dr. Carlos Prioso-Cruz, and Laureano Batista Falla.
Those names don't ring a bell. Who were they, and why are they important in this story?
Miguel de Leon first. He was Manuel Artime's coordinator in Nicaragua. Interestingly, after Kennedy's assassination, he starts spreading this misinformation trying to tie the president's death to Cuba.
Interesting. What about Prioso-Cruz?
Now he's a fascinating character. Prioso-Cruz was actually the president of Cuba from '48 to '52 until Batista overthrew him. Known for being corrupt, used his ill-gotten gains to back anti-Batista folks, including, get this, Fidel Castro and Rolando Cubela.
He supported Castro. Now that's a plot twist.
It is. But by '63, he'd switched sides, funding anti-Castro groups, and his connections were vast. associated with Antonio de Verona, big in Cuban exile circles, involved in early CIA plots to kill Castro. There's even evidence suggesting Pria was talking to John Rosselli, a lieutenant for Chicago mob boss Sam Giancana, through meetings that also involved the CIA.
Okay, wait. So we have this ex-Cuban president, corrupt, mob ties, involved in plots against Castro, and Luis Somoza is meeting with him just months before JFK's assassination.
Yep. And then we add Laureano Batista Falla to the mix. He led a faction of the Movimiento Demócrata Cristiano, or MDC, a Cuban exile group. His brother, Augustin, was a high-flying banker with some curious associates.
I'm hooked. Who was Augustin Batista Falla connected to?
One key connection was to the Anson Corporation, accused of laundering millions in Cuban money into U.S. real estate, possibly involving the Teamsters, maybe even Richard Nixon.
Nixon, as in the future president Nixon.
The one and only. The web just keeps getting wider, doesn't it? Augustin was also associated with Jose Altamont Sr., who was education minister under Prio Socarrás back in Cuba. Altamont's son, Jose Jr., knew Rolando Cubella, the CIA asset, codenamed MLAH, who would later plot to kill Castro. And it was to Jose Altamont Jr. that Florida mob boss Santo Traficante allegedly made his infamous anti-Kennedy remarks back in September '62.
This is getting crazy. The Somozas, Cuban exiles, the mob, the CIA, and now we're bringing Nixon into it. This is some serious intrigue.
It is. And then there's Mario Garcia Colli. Some sources say he was the political leader of Batista Falla's MDC faction. His potential involvement is big because of the allegations made by a former CIA contract agent, Robert Morrow.
Okay, I'm listening. What did Morrow allege?
Morrow claimed that Colli had a golf meeting with then Vice President Nixon in October 1960. And during this meeting, they made a deal. If the Bay of Pigs worked, Colli would be president of Cuba, and Nixon would make sure the more leftist elements of the Proto-Cuban Revolutionary Council, including Manuel Artime, were, well, violently purged.
That's a pretty serious accusation. Any evidence to back it up?
It's hard to say for sure. It first came out in '76 through affidavits submitted to Congressman Thomas Downing by both Morrow and Colli's son, Mario Jr. They both said Colli talked to them about this alleged pact.
So at least there's some corroboration there.
There is. Adding to the intrigue, Colli and Morrow later cooked up a plan to mess with the Cuban economy by circulating fake Cuban pesos. U.S. authorities caught wind of it, and they were both arrested in October '63.
Just weeks before Kennedy was killed.
Exactly. Morrow got a suspended sentence, but Colli got 2 years, although he only served 9 months. And here's the kicker. After Kennedy's assassination, Colli's son said his father seemed elated and quite relieved. He seemed more pleased, I would say, than surprised. I am sure he had knowledge of what really happened in Dealey Plaza.
Even if we're cautious about Morrow's claims, Colli's reaction to Kennedy's death is definitely suspicious.
It is. And even if we set Colli aside, Batista Falla's MDC is still a suspect organization. Their activities that summer of '63, especially their paramilitary training camp north of Lake Pontchartrain in Louisiana, those are worth noting.
What was going on at that training camp?
Batista Falla supplied a bunch of recruits, and the instructors included David Ferry, close to Guy Bannister, and interestingly enough, Loran Hall, the former American soldier who had trained men to invade Nicaragua.
It's a small world, after all.
It really is. The FBI shut down the camp in late July '63 by raiding a nearby arms cache. Later, Batista Falla told New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison that the trainees were meant to join Manuel Artime's project in Central America with Nicaragua's approval.
So we have this training camp tied to Batista Falla, Nicaragua, and people who would later be implicated in JFK assassination theories. It's all starting to feel very interconnected.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And this is just the tip of the iceberg. Nicaragua's clandestine activities in '63, they go even deeper.
It's like peeling back layers of an onion, and each layer reveals something more intriguing. What else was happening?
Late October '63, just weeks before Dallas, we have the Rex Affair. Fidel Castro announces that Cuban forces have captured 2 motor launches full of weapons meant for rebels inside Cuba. Castro says the launches came from a ship called the Rex. A day later, Havana shows off a prisoner who admits the CIA was behind it all. Turns out the men involved were members of the Commandos L, an anti-Castro group financed by the CIA.
Okay, so far so good. But where does Nicaragua fit into this?
Here's where it gets juicy. The Rex was leased by Collins Radio International of Dallas, a division of Collins Radio. They were known for defense contracts and working with the CIA. Collins Radio International, in turn, leased the Rex for electronic and oceanographic research from J.A. Belcher, the head of Belcher Oil Company in Miami. Now, Belcher bought the ship from the Paragon Company, which was owned by, you guessed it, Luis Somoza's family. And some researchers believe Belcher Oil was actually a CIA front company.
So the Somozas were leasing a ship to the CIA that was running guns to Cuba.
Exactly. And it gets even more tangled. The Rex was still registered in the Nicaraguan port of Bluefields at the time, and its docking fees in West Palm Beach were being handled by the Sea Key Shipping Company, which was nothing more than a mail drop.
Wow, they weren't exactly being subtle about it, were they?
Nope. And there's more. The Rex had a sister ship, the Lita, also used for anti-Castro operations, based in Florida, officially run by the Lake K Company, again for oceanographic surveys, and guess what? Registered in Greytown, Nicaragua.
So Nicaragua, or at least the Somoza family, was deeply involved in covert ops against Castro. That's crystal clear. But how does this connect to JFK? What's the relevance to his assassination?
The million-dollar question. The key figure here is Henry C. Bruton, the VP of Collins Radio. A retired U.S. Navy admiral, he was the director of naval communications until 1960.
So, a high-ranking guy with deep ties to the intelligence world.
Precisely. And here's where it gets really interesting. Bruton knew George de Mohrenschildt, the Russian geologist who was friends with Lee Harvey Oswald in Dallas. In late summer '62, de Mohrenschildt tells Bruton that his young pal, Oswald, needs a job.
Hold on. The guy who leased the ship caught running guns to Cuba knew the man accused of assassinating JFK.
Yes. And while Bruton initially brushed off de Mohrenschildt's request, de Mohrenschildt later claimed he even introduced Oswald to Bruton, though Bruton was apparently quite dismissive of Oswald.
That's quite a coincidence, to say the least.
It is. And given everything we've talked about, it's hard not to consider a possible connection. Remember, this is all happening while Cuba is a hotbed of activity. The Sylvia Odio incident in late September '63, where Oswald was supposedly seen with people later identified as being involved in anti-Castro activities. Then the Rex affair at the end of October.
And then, boom, Kennedy is assassinated just a few weeks later.
Right. And after Kennedy's death, the Somozas do some things that really raise eyebrows. They start a disinformation campaign that seems aimed at making Cuba look responsible for the assassination.
So they were trying to pin it on Castro.
That's how it looks. November 25th, '63, 3 days after Oswald is killed by Jack Ruby, a Latin American man walks into the U.S. Embassy in Mexico City. He claims he saw Oswald get $5,000 from some people at the Cuban consulate in Mexico City back in September.
That would have been a smoking gun if it was true.
It would have. But under CIA questioning, the guy's story falls apart. He takes back his statement, then takes back his retraction, total mess. In the end, he's completely discredited.
So was he lying?
Could be. But David Atlee Phillips, former CIA officer, known for his controversial Maurice Bishop allegation, he said the CIA figured out the guy was a Nicaraguan intelligence agent.
The Somozas sent an agent to spread lies about Oswald and Cuba. What was their angle?
That's what Phillips claimed. And the Nicaraguan government initially lied to the CIA, saying the agent was a major communist figure, which was totally false. Phillips thought maybe the Somozas were trying to protect themselves, deflect blame for the assassination away from them and onto Cuba.
This is all so complex. And the Somozas weren't the only ones spreading disinformation. Miguel de Leon and Sixto Mal, both connected to Manuel Artime, they cooked up a story saying Cuba was plotting against Nicaragua and that Oswald was talking to one of the masterminds.
Yep, they fed that fabrication to a journalist to spread around. Seems everyone had an agenda in the chaos after Kennedy's death.
So what happened next? Did the Somozas manage to get away with their plans?
Well, if their goal was to get rid of both Kennedy brothers and Castro, it didn't work out so well. JFK was gone, Lyndon B. Johnson was president, and the anti-Castro movement lost steam. The second Havana Project fizzled, and Artime ended up joining the CIA's Amalash plot to kill Castro.
What about Luis Somoza? Did he hold on to power?
No, he died of a heart attack in April '67, just 44 years old. Whatever secrets he had, he took with him to the grave. His brother Anastasio took over Nicaragua completely, ruled with an iron fist until the Sandinistas finally overthrew him in '79.
It's a story that both fascinates and disturbs. So many unanswered questions. What were the Somozas really after? Were they involved in JFK's assassination? What secrets did they take with them? I guess we'll never know for sure.
These are the questions that keep historians busy, even today. The Somoza dynasty's shadow still looms large over Nicaragua, and what they did in the early '60s continues to intrigue and puzzle researchers. The evidence suggests they were key players in a web of intrigue that stretched far beyond their little Central American country.
It reminds us that history is rarely black and white. There are always hidden layers, agendas we don't see, and questions that may never be fully answered.
And that's what makes studying history so compelling. It's a constant process of digging up new information, connecting the dots, and trying to make sense of the past.
We've only just scratched the surface of this complex story, but we're running out of time for this deep dive.
It's wild, right? All those connections, all those possible implications. Luis Somoza meeting with people tied to the CIA, the mob, Cuban exiles, even future President Nixon, like something out of a spy movie.
Totally. And don't forget that Rex affair. A ship linked to the Somoza family caught red-handed running guns to Cuba for the CIA just weeks before Kennedy was killed.
Oh man, that whole thing is so shady. It makes you wonder, how much did Luis Somoza know? What was his role, if any, in the events leading up to JFK's assassination? Was he a pawn, a player, or something else entirely? Tough to say for sure. But the timing of those meetings, his deep involvement in those covert ops, and then his government trying to blame Cuba after the assassination, yeah, it definitely raises some suspicions.
What do you think was going through his head in those crucial months of '63? Did he have a clue about what was about to happen?
We can only speculate, Ro, but he was definitely operating in a world of secrets, a whole web of alliances and betrayals. Maybe he got caught up in something that spiraled out of control, or maybe he was playing a deeper game than we realized.
It's frustrating. We may never know for sure. Luis Somoza died young, and a lot of the key players in this whole drama, well, they're not around anymore.
That's history for you. Always leaves you with more questions than answers. Pieces of a puzzle, clues, and these mysteries that keep us coming back for more.
It reminds us that history is never really over and done with. There are always new discoveries to make, connections to draw, different ways of looking at things.
Exactly. And that's what makes exploring history so rewarding. It's a constant journey of finding new information, questioning what we thought we knew, and putting together a more complete picture of the past.
Well, we've definitely gone deep on this one. From the mysterious Knights of Malta to the rise and fall of the Somoza dynasty and their possible connection to the events surrounding JFK's assassination. These threads of history, they intertwine in ways that continue to spark debate and keep those conspiracy theories alive.
This deep dive, I hope it's inspired you to keep digging into these fascinating figures and events. There's so much more to uncover. Who knows what other connections are waiting to be found?
We encourage you to keep exploring, keep researching, and keep pondering all the mysteries that history throws our way. Because really, who doesn't love a good historical puzzle? Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. Until next time, happy researching.